Hi, everybody. Welcome to English Digest. I'm Tom.
And I'm Leah.
What exactly are we discussing in today's program, Leah?
Well, today we're talking about things that are going extinct. And it says here, could your favorite food be going extinct? I think that when we talk about food being extinct, it means that it's something that's not around anymore. I mean, most of the time when I think about it, I think about like animals going extinct or an extinct volcano. But I don't think about it so much as being used with plants, although it is.
Indeed, with plants and also with food. It seems like we get nothing but bad news about what's going on with the world. So now we have to worry about food, which seems to be natural. It seems to be reasonable that this would be a problem as well. So let's find out what this is all about, everybody. Let's listen to the entire article read from top to bottom.
In today's modern world, we're used to having our pick of food. The origins of the last tuna fish sandwich or chocolate bar you consumed likely didn't cross your mind. Worryingly, these foods could soon become a thing of the past. Without swift and definite action, an alarming number of food items face extinction. Here are just a few we risk losing. Wheat. Wheat might be the most surprising food to find in this list, as it is a staple crop across the world. Extreme weather patterns are disrupting the growing and harvesting cycles of wheat farmers. Though more prosperous countries might turn to alternative cereal crops, the loss of wheat could lead to disaster in poorer regions. One solution is for farmers to rotate wheat with other crops, as crop variety makes farms more resilient. You can also encourage crop diversity and vary your own diet by purchasing beans, lentils, and non-wheat breads. Cocoa. More and more, the chocolate bars we see in stores are constituted of very little actual cocoa. That's because the cocoa plant is being decimated by increasingly arid weather in the tropical areas where it's developed. Cocoa is almost exclusively rain-fed, so even modest decreases in rainfall bring serious consequences. Additionally, just as with wheat, single-crop growing practices worsen soil conditions and leave cocoa crops at risk of failure. Thankfully, the cocoa industry is waking up to these dangers and promoting agroforestry practices, where cocoa plants are grown among other local plant species that shade crops and protect soil. You can do your part by selecting organic chocolate, which is often reasonably priced as well as delicious and high quality.
Okay, everybody, let's get to it. Let's discuss the contents of today's lesson. We're starting with a question. Could your favorite food be going extinct? Maybe this will happen. Yeah, it doesn't sound like very good news. I have a feeling that the answer to this question might be yes. And you did touch on this earlier, Leah, when you began the program. To go extinct means to disappear from the world forever. We often think of the dinosaurs. They went extinct millions of years ago.
And for this first sentence, it says, in today's modern world, we're used to having our pick of food. So that means that today, if we want something to eat, we can normally find it. We get to choose. We get to pick and choose what we want. It's not like we are only likely to get one thing. It's not that we have to have rice every day or have to have noodles every day. We can pick what we want. The origins of the last tuna fish sandwich or chocolate bar you consumed likely didn't cross your mind. I just wanted to point out here origins, because a lot of times these days when you hear about single origins or single origin of a product, it means that it came from one place. So you get single origin coffee, maybe from Guatemala or from Indonesia. Or you get multiple origin nuts. So you might get a pack of mixed nuts, and the cashews might be from Thailand, and the almonds might be from, South America, and the pecans might be from North America.
Indeed. So, of course, if you're looking for where something came from, if you want to know where it came from, you're talking about its origin. And yeah, when you have a tuna fish sandwich, you don't really think about that fish swimming in the ocean, getting caught in a net, taken to the market, getting bashed over the head and cut up into smaller pieces. We don't usually think about those sorts of things. And we also don't really think about the chocolate bar that you consumed. We don't really think of where that came from, how it was harvested and all those sorts of things, and it did not cross your mind, and that just means it didn't occur to you or you didn't think of that. And worryingly, these foods could soon become a thing of the past. That's kind of tricky to pronounce there. Worryingly. Interesting. That's an adverb there. So yeah, it's something that we need to worry about. They could become a thing of the past, which means something that does not exist anymore.
Without swift or definite action, an alarming number of food items face extinction. So if we don't do this thing, then a large number of foods will become extinct or will face extinction. If something hasn't become extinct yet, we often say it's facing extinction. It's on the verge of extinction. So without what? Without swift, so quick, and definite action. Definite means that you're going in an obvious direction. You have chosen what you're doing, and you're going forward with a kind of a stable, solid direction that you're wanting to improve the situation with. So if you do not take swift and definite action, then an alarming number, a very frightening number of our food items out there will be in trouble.
That's right. So definite comes from the verb to define, which means to say exactly what something means. So, of course, we need specific action. We need definite action. And if we don't take that swift and definite action, then an alarming number of food items face extinction. They may disappear. And we may need to change our diets, or maybe we'll starve to death. Who knows? And here are just a few we risk losing. Okay, so what kinds of foods are we risking losing? Remember, food in general is non-count. I need to get some food. I'm very hungry. But if you talk about different kinds of food, then you can make it countable. You see this in food companies like, the ABC Foods Company, because they make different kinds of food.
And one of the items that we might be in trouble with would be wheat. Now, wheat is something that is grown. It's a grain. It is a crop that is normally used all over the world. It is ground up and it is processed and made into flour. It is used in noodles. It's used in all sorts of different items that you eat every day, probably 70, 80%, maybe 90% of the foods that you might pick out at a 7-Eleven or Family Mart have some form of wheat in them. So it's a very common thing. And that's why this sentence says, wheat might be the most surprising food to find in this list or on this list, as it is a staple crop across the world. So something that is very common when you come to food crops is a staple crop. It's one of the most basic crops that we use at our farm all the time. So another staple crop would be rice, and I'm sure we can think of plenty of other staple crops as well.
Indeed, and staple as a noun just refers to something that is in your diet every day, like rice is a staple of the Taiwan diet, wheat is a staple in the American diet, etc. And you listed some examples there of food made from wheat, noodles, suijiao skins, for your dumplings. Those are made from wheat, etc. So that would affect Taiwan very much so if wheat were to go extinct. And extreme weather patterns are disrupting the growing and harvesting cycles of wheat farmers. So yes, we've got these extreme weather patterns that are going on. We've got periods of drought and we've got periods of heavy rain. And of course, as a result of that, they are disrupting the growing and harvesting cycles of wheat farmers. So here we've got disrupting. That's from the verb to disrupt, which means to interrupt, to cause a disturbance in something. It cannot cannot continue going forward. It has to stop or it has to change. So indeed, we don't want that to happen. It's similar in meaning to interrupt in a conversation. If somebody butts in when you're talking to somebody, that means they're interrupting. But here, disrupting talks more about a process.
Right. Your teacher might tell you to stop disrupting the class, and that just means you're sitting in your chair and making noises, making funny faces, or causing problems so the folks around you cannot pay attention to the teacher. You're being disruptive. Okay. The more prosperous countries might turn to alternative cereal crops. The loss of wheat could lead to disaster in poorer regions. So countries that are more prosperous, the ones that are a little bit more wealthy, have a little bit more money, they will be probably okay because they might use more corn crops or rice crops, or they might do something fancy and create something with amaranth or something like this. They might have an alternative cereal crop. So those are some alternatives. And cereal here means a kind of a grain in my mind. I'm not sure what you think on that one, Tom.
Well, yeah, it does refer to grains like wheat and barley and buckwheat and rice and oats and things like that. Those are different kinds of cereal crops. And so the loss of wheat could lead to disaster in poorer regions. So I am aware that they grow wheat in certain parts of North America, in South Dakota. We had some friends who had a farm out there in South Dakota, and they grew wheat. And, of course, if they had some problems there, they could switch to other kinds of crops like corn or something like that. But in poorer countries, that would be more of a problem.
And it might be the thing you want to do anyway because it's better for the crops, better for the soil underneath the crops. So one solution is for farmers to rotate wheat with other crops, as crop variety makes farms more resilient. So one solution, one answer to this problem of this disruptive weather patterns causing a problem with the growing of the wheat crops is to change it around, to rotate. Here, it does still mean circle, right? If you rotate something, it means to turn it in a circle. You can rotate the wheel of a ship. You can rotate the tires on your bicycle or your scooter. You can rotate in your seat if you want to, and they'll tell you you're disrupting the class. But here, they're talking about rotating crops. So it means to maybe do wheat one year, change it to corn a second year, bring it back to wheat about 2 or 3 years later. You're turning around in a cycle.
Yeah, they tend to rotate crops in Iowa, the state I'm from. They rotate between soybeans and corn. And so I guess that's a good way to keep crops growing for different seasons. And, of course, rotating those crops can make farms more resilient. And resilient here, of course, is an adjective. It just means they're able to withstand outside pressure. They can, go back into their original...
Bounce back.
What's that?
They can bounce back.
They can bounce back, indeed. Yeah. They can come back to their original condition without suffering too much. And, of course, that's the result of rotation or rotating crops. Okay, that brings us about to the midway point in today's lesson. Let's take a break right now and listen to our Chinese teacher.
听众朋友大家好，我是安娜。我们来看一下今天的标题，很吓人呢。他说你喜欢的食物可能 going extinct， 可能走上灭绝之路诶。不过在第一段的第一句，我们可以把逗点之后一个片语画起来，蛮常用的哦。习惯于什么什么东西 we are used to something。Be used to something， 特别注意 to 介系词哦。我们习惯选择自己的食物，或许你可能吃个鲔鱼三明治啦，或吃个巧克力啊之类的。可是你有没有想过这些东西的来源呢？那么比较令人担忧的是，这些食物可能就会成为 a thing of the past， 过去。如果我们不迅速的行动的话，有很多东西都会不见的。所以接下来我们要谈一谈今天跟明天，包括小麦呀、可可啊，还有鲔鱼，甚至是蜂蜜，都是有可能我们会失去的一些食物哦。好，我们来看第一种小麦 wheat。小麦可能会这个灭绝的食物清单里面令人最惊讶的东西，因为很多世界各地的国家都是以小麦当成 stable crop， 当成主要的作物，所以这真的是很令人惊讶。不过在小麦的 这一段当中第一句逗点之后的 as 是连接词 because 的意思哦。那么为什么小麦会不见呢？主要是因为极端气候。在接下来第二句有看到 extreme weather patterns， 因为极端气候的模式一直在干扰小麦农民的生长，还有收获的周期。那当然有钱的国家，比较繁荣的国家，干脆不吃小麦，就可以吃一些其他的谷类作物可能会转向替代性的谷类的作物。我们来看一下同样这一段的第三句，我们把动词抓出来 turn to something。这里的 turn to something 是转而向什么对象、某人事物求助的意思。但是小麦的损失还是会导致比较贫穷地区的灾难。那么有没有一些解决方案呢？其中有一个解决方案就是让农民将小麦还有其他的作物做一个轮作，因为作物如果多样化的话，农场土壤的适应力就会更强。所以同样在这边第四句的地方，我们看到逗点之后的 as， 它也是连接词，表示 because 的意思。
We're going to take a short break now, but please stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Okay, so once again, we were just talking about rotating wheat crops. That's one solution farmers have to being able to deal with the problems when they're growing one crop over and over again. It might be difficult for a farm to continue on. It's difficult for a farm to be resilient. If you have bad weather, you have a bad crop year, you can't do anything about it. You can't bounce back. Going back in here to the next sentence, it says, you can also encourage crop diversity. You can also say diversity and vary your own diet by purchasing beans, lentils, and non-wheat breads. So again, one thing you can do is you can rotate crops. That helps the farmers. But a thing that you, on the other end, the consumer, can do is you can encourage that crop diversity. Diversity means a variety. If you want something to be diverse, you want it to have a lot of variety. Crop diversity here means many different kinds of crops. And you can do that because you can go out and buy different kinds of beans, you can buy lentils, you can buy non-wheat breads.
Right, and if you go to, say, New York or San Francisco or Toronto, cities like that, you will see a lot of cultural diversity. Many different people living in those cities from different countries who speak different languages, who have different customs. So those cities are very diverse, or they have a lot of diversity. So yes, you can encourage crop diversity, and you can also vary your own diet, and you can do that by purchasing beans, lentils, and non-wheat breads. I guess you can make bread from other kinds of grains besides wheat. I guess there's rye bread and other types of bread as well. And lentils are kind of like beans. I guess in Chinese you say 小扁豆. So that's what a lentil is, but I think of it as being similar to a bean, but I guess technically it's not the same thing. And so these are some things that you can do. You can have a diverse diet, basically eat lots of different things besides wheat.
So we've talked about wheat being one of our staple crops, or one of those foods that might go and face extinction. Another one would be cocoa. Now, cocoa comes from the cocoa tree, and you get these cocoa seeds. You take them down, you roast them, and you grind them up, and you get cocoa powder. And once you get that cocoa powder, you have this delicious thing that makes chocolate milk. It makes chocolate bars. It can make you brownies. It can make you fudge, and all sorts of things chocolate. So the chocolate crop is another crop, or the cocoa crop is another crop we need to be worried about. More and more, the chocolate bars we see in stores are constituted of very little actual cocoa. You notice here the word chocolate is in quotation marks, and that just means it's not 所谓的. It's not really chocolate, it's the so-called chocolate bar. And they go into more explanation of that behind, because they say, well, these are chocolate bars, but they don't really have much chocolate or chocolate-making thing, cocoa, in them.
Right. Similarly, I guess you could say the so-called wasabi that you get in sushi bars probably isn't real wasabi. It's probably a mixture of horseradish and various other things. So this is kind of similar here. You get these chocolate bars, but they're not really chocolate. They're just pretending to be chocolate, I guess. And they're constituted or made of or made from very little actual cocoa. That's because the cocoa plant is being decimated by increasingly arid weather in the tropical areas where it's developed. So, first of all, this sentence tells us that cocoa is grown in tropical areas. And, of course, they have arid weather there. Arid means really, really hot. It's getting hotter and hotter and drier in those places. So I guess arid actually refers more to dry than hot. I think of arid as being both dry and hot, but right. I guess technically it's supposed to be dry, and they don't have a lot of rain there. So if it's an arid place like a desert is very arid. So, of course, if something's decimated, it's just destroyed. It's harmed in a great way.
I like this word decimated. It's something where if you really beat another team badly in a sport, you can say, we decimated them. Of course, you shouldn't say that around the other team because it's not good sportsmanship, but you could say it maybe to your friends at home later. If you're bragging, you can be like, oh yeah, we decimated that other team. We really wiped them out. Following along, it says here, cocoa is almost exclusively rain-fed, so even modest decreases in rainfall bring serious consequences. So because cocoa needs rain, and we're talking about there being more and more dry or arid weather, well, it exclusively needs that rain. It can't live any other way. And if the conditions are drier out there, what's it going to do? It's going to be badly affected. Your cocoa crop is not going to grow the right way. And it's so bad that even a modest decrease in rainfall can bring serious consequences. If something is modest, it means just a little bit. It's not a big decrease. It's just a little decrease. You can say that a person is very modest, and that means they don't brag about themselves and tell how wonderful they are, and they can dress modestly, which means they don't show a lot of extra skin. Even maybe when it's hot out, they kind of cover up different parts of their body so they don't, expose too much skin. They're being very modest.
Right, so even just small decreases or modest decreases in rainfall can bring serious consequences. And additionally, just as with wheat, single crop growing practices worsen soil conditions and leave cocoa crops at risk of failure. So again, we're talking about single crop growing practices of growing only one type of crop and not rotating those crops. That might actually help. So if you only grow one type of crop, it can kind of be bad for the soil, and then that makes the crops in the future more likely to fail. Now, thankfully, the cocoa industry is waking up to these dangers and promoting agroforestry practices. So here we've got the phrase to wake up to something. To wake up means you just stop sleeping and you're ready to get out of bed in the morning, but to wake up to something means you're aware of a problem and you realize you need to do something about it.
Right, if you think of the Imagine Dragons song, "Waking Up to Flesh and Bones" or something like that, I think it's you're becoming aware of this apocalyptic situation that you're in. And here they're talking about the agroforestry practices. So agroforestry is a combination of agriculture and forestry, where you put the crops out and you also plant trees that have fruits or nuts that can kind of give some shade to the crops as they're growing. It can also support the soil, because if you're only planting the same crop over and over again, the soil starts to erode. It starts to wear away and go away, and it also loses all its nutrients. So it needs its nutrients to grow good crops. So this agroforestry practice, where cocoa plants are grown among other local species that shade crops and protect soil, well, that method allows the cocoa plants, or the plants that are being grown in that environment, to thrive a lot better. And you as well can do your part by selecting organic chocolate, which is often reasonably priced as well as delicious and high quality.
Well, I like chocolate, but I don't know where to buy organic chocolate. Do you know where they sell organic chocolate here in Taiwan?
I think occasionally in the bigger stores you can find organic chocolate. It might be a little bit difficult. You might buy organic cocoa powder.And then you can try to make your own chocolate if you feel like playing in the kitchen a little bit.
Okay, that brings us to the end of our discussion for today. It's time now to listen to our Chinese teacher.
当然除此之外我们也可以 do something， 因为其实你也可以透过购买豆类啊、小扁豆啊，或者是其他非小麦的面包来鼓励作物的多样性。我们买的多，农民就会种的多，那么农民就会觉得生物的多样化是有市场的，那么就可以让你的饮食也可以多样化。不过我们在同样这一段的第5句有看到括号里面有一个动词叫做 vary V-A-R-Y， 它是动词，就是使什么什么多样性。刚才提到上一句话的 variety 是多样性，那么这里看到动词，不过它的形容词也很常见哦。我们说各式各样的叫做 various V-A-R-I-O-U-S various V-A-R-I-O-U-S 好，接下来看到的就是巧克力啊、可可这个东西。可可也有可能会濒临灭绝，因为其实越来越多我们在商店当中看到的巧克力上面会写代可可，它其实不是真正的可可。好，我们看一下巧克力这一段的第1句哦，有一个限定用法的关系子句，先行词是 the chocolate bars， 后面的关系子句从 we 到 stores， 同样也是冠带 which or that 的省略，因为在这里的冠带当成括号里面 c 的受词，所以可以是省略的。好，那么为什么可可会几乎面临灭绝呢？因为可可植物啊，它生长的热带地区，因为日益干旱的关系，这种天气极端气候的关系，所以就大幅的减少。同样在第2句话当中也有一个限定用法的关系子句哦，先行词是 the tropical areas 热带地区，关系子句从后面的where 一直到句尾的地方可以左右括号， where 指的是在那些热带地区当中 it's developed 它被种植的那些热带地区当中。为什么会这样呢？因为可可啊，也就是巧克力豆，巧克力这个东西它其实不是用人工去灌溉，它其实是靠雨水的。在接下来第3句逗点之前，这个字可以画起来 rain fed， 所以跟小麦一样，如果说呢降雨量减少会带来严重后果，那么另外呢单一种植也会让土壤的情况恶化，所以可可呢就会面临欠收。不过好家在现在可可产业呢已经意识到这种危险，就促进了一种所谓的混农林业的这种做法。那么在这样的做法当中，可可植物呢就可以因为有其他作物呢一起来种，就可以遮蔽阳光啊，保护土壤啊。那这样子的话呢，就可以增加可可生存的这个机会。我们同样看一下这一段当中，在第5句先看到一个所谓的混农林业，这里的做法它是一个先行词，后面带着补充说明的关系子句。好，我们看到混农林业做法 Agroforestry Practices， 这里可以画起来它是先行词，逗点之后的 where 到句尾有点长哦，补充说明在这样子的做法当中就可以如何如何，当然是跟其他的植物一起做咯。不过它是一个大包小的关系子句，在括号里面还有一个限定用法的关系子句，先行词是 other local plant species， 那么后面的限定用法关系子句则从 that 一直到句尾的地方。当然我们还可以选择有机巧克力来尽一己之力保护这些作物。明天要记得准时收听哦，我是安娜，我们明天见。
We're going to continue on with this tomorrow, but before we do, we're going to say goodbye to you today. I'm Leah.
And I'm Tom. Goodbye.
Goodbye.